Good afternoon. I'm Sasha Millstone, and I'm the president of the Women's National Democratic Club. And we would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you for joining us this afternoon for a very special program. Before I begin by introducing our head table, I just want to call your attention to a couple of other announcements. First of all, as many of you know, we are collecting Christmas gifts for the children at the Neville Thomas School. And we have 400 gifts that we need to collect by next week, by December 16th. So if those of you who haven't yet had a chance to bring them would get a gift and wrap it, and you can even go right upstairs into the boutique and get a gift right there and bring it. I know the children will be delighted. Also, tomorrow evening from 6 to 8 p.m., we have a reception here that we're holding in honor of the new Democratic congressmen and women. And we have at least 15 that are coming. And so we hope that you all will want to join us. This is an event that's co-sponsored by the Potomac Group and the Women's National Democratic Club. And finally, as we close out our programs for the holiday season on December 15th, we will be holding a holiday party, a holiday celebration. And that will be, as I say, the evening of December 15th. We'll have all kinds of entertainment, and it'll be a banquet, and I hope that you will all join us for that. Today's luncheon is sponsored by the Women's National Democratic Club Educational Foundation. And as a matter of fact, the Educational Foundation is also responsible for the gift collection for the Neville Thomas School. We have many distinguished guests with us today, and unfortunately, it's simply a lack of time that prevents me from introducing every one of them to you. But I'd like everyone to know that we have a number of distinguished educators with us, and we have a number of school board members with us as well today. I'd like to introduce our head table to you, starting on my right. Adelaide Newberger, excellent member of the Women's National Democratic Club and chair of today's program. She is also the mother of Eve Brooks, who is sitting right next to her, and I will be introducing Eve in just a moment. Also, we have Susan Kanoy with us, who is project director for an Appeal to Conscience, which is a program for support of needy and elderly, disabled, and special children. To my far left is Sandy Berry, Vice President of Political Affairs here at the Women's National Democratic Club. And you all know Marian Wright Edelman, who will be introduced by Eve Brooks. We have at this organization a special emphasis this year on children's rights. Our task force on human rights and our task force on education are focusing on domestic issues, women and children, Head Start, and we also have task forces addressing health care issues and women's issues. So we're particularly pleased to bring this program to you today. Eve Brooks is President and Chief Executive Officer of the Association of Child Advocates. She assumed its leadership in the fall of 1991. The association is a national organization. It provides services and leadership to state-based child advocacy organizations across the nation. She came to the association after spending 15 years as executive director of New York State's statewide youth advocacy. She founded statewide youth advocacy, where she managed a staff of 14 policy analysts and lawyers. She has a professional career in social policy analysis and public policy change, which spans over 25 years, 20 of which have been in leadership and management of public policy advocacy organizations. She has numerous accomplishments. Just a few of them: she authored and supervised numerous studies and analyses of public policy, program planning, development, and fundraising. And she has provided expert testimony before national and state legislative bodies. An ardent voice for children, she has argued persuasively for strong state investments for vulnerable children and families since she founded statewide youth advocacy in 1976. And I'd like you to help me welcome Eve Brooks. By the way, Eve is also a new member of the Women's National Democratic Club.
With a mother like Adelaide Eisman Newberger, it would be very hard not to be a member of the club, and I'm very glad to join you all here and to come back to Washington, D.C., where I once had residence, but it's been a long time. I'm clearly a New York Stater, as you can hear from the accent. I cannot lose it. It's a great privilege to be here today and to welcome our guest speaker. As you can see from this sellout crowd, Marian Wright Edelman is as beloved in this town as she is across the country, in the towns and cities in which she speaks. Wherever thoughtful people gather to examine the needs of America's children, it's Marian's leadership which inspires us to action. Marian Wright Edelman is the daughter of a Baptist minister, brought up in the then segregated town of Bennettsville, South Carolina. She was taught early to put her talents to the service of her community, and that community, of course, has grown as she and her reputation has grown. A graduate of Spelman College, she earned her law degree at Yale. She became the first black woman admitted to the Mississippi Bar, where she directed the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund, and among the many things that she worked on in Mississippi was the fledgling Head Start program. It was my privilege to meet Marian in 1967. It's been a long time, and I remember that first dinner together and how tired Marian, who was then commuting from Mississippi to see Peter and to reestablish herself here in Washington, was that night. There was no way that I would know that I would look to her repeatedly for leadership, for inspiration over the rest of my career. But that indeed has been what has followed, and it's been a joy to look to her and to watch her career blossom and the effects for children that it has had. The year later, 1968, she moved to Washington, established the Washington Research Project, and as I left, found in 1973 a small brochure in my mail announcing the beginning of a new organization, the Children's Defense Fund of the Washington Research Project. For those of us who were looking for a way to finish the unfinished struggle, or to continue that unfinished struggle for equity and equality, the Children's Defense Fund pointed a new direction, a direction which everyone could grasp. That the job that must be moved forward is the job for children. Everyone could understand that and come to work together on that agenda. And so through the Children's Defense Fund, Marian Wright Edelman has provided a unique and crystal clear vision and leadership. She has blended fine traditions of law and ministry to create her own brand of advocacy, convincing the country through fact upon fact that we have too long allowed children to be abused, to be poor, to be hungry, to be homeless, to be the focus of violence, and to live in despair. As Time magazine noted in 1987, Mrs. Edelman is one of Washington's most unusual lobbyists whose effectiveness depends as much on her erudite use of statistics as on moral suasion. And this Sunday morning, many of you may have watched the show with Marian on it, where Chris Dodd the senator from Connecticut was quoted as saying that if there was anyone he wanted to be in a foxhole with on a legislative fight, it would be Marian. Indeed, she's spearheaded so many successful legislative and budgetary improvements that they're hard to mention. And she's inspired a legion of followers in towns and cities across the country, from San Francisco to Rochester, and here in Washington, D.C., where there's a D.C. ACT group about to start off in its own special call for children. She's also inspired child advocacy groups in 38 states across the country that follow the CDF model of multi-issue approaches to children, and I'm privileged to serve as the president of the association of those groups. In the 2 decades of her leadership of children's advocacy, Marian has mentored some very special people, among them a young Yale law student, Hillary Rodman, who's worked closely with CDF and until recently chaired its board. And among her many honors is the coveted MacArthur Foundation Prize from 1985, but perhaps one of the greatest was the appearance of the president-elect just right after his election at the CDF dinner. That really was a very special signal. And Mrs. Edelman's special relationship with the Clintons should mean that we achieve some of the major goals for American children that we've all been striving for: a head start, a healthy start, freedom from hunger and homelessness. They're all, we hope, within our grasp at this time. It's tremendously important that Marian stay in the position as president of Children's Defense Fund to see these critical fights through, to make sure they happen. It's the outsider role, I think, in this time that is most important. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome Marian today and to encourage you all to join us in raising your voices for children in these exciting Clinton years.
Thank you, Eve. And thank all of you for being here. This is a time of great hope and of great change. And when I come to this club, I feel like I'm coming home, since the first office of the Children's Defense Fund was next door. And you were our landladies, and so it's wonderful to be here. And although this is a time of great hope and change, it's also a time of great challenge, and we've all got a lot of work to do. And while we will have, I hope and know, a new tone and direction from our president, and we've now got a new Congress with more women and minority groups than ever in our history, we've all got to begin to be a part of this change, person by person and club by club, because I think our country really does face a major crisis, and the president-elect and Mrs. Clinton and the Congress alone cannot do it without all of our help. Because on the eve of a new century and millennium, a new civil war is raging throughout our land as the dangerous triplets of racial intolerance, economic insecurity, and violence spread across America. Unless confronted forthrightly, they will stain our moral and social fabric indelibly, fray our national bonds, and undermine our ideals, domestic safety, and future. Ironically, as communism is collapsing all around the world, the American dream is collapsing all around America for millions of families, youths, and children in all races and classes. We are in danger of becoming two nations, one of first world privilege and another of third world deprivation, struggling against increasing odds to coexist peacefully as a beleaguered middle class barely holds on. Racial strife and hate crimes are resurging all over our land. Some of it is blatant, like the unjust Rodney King beating and verdict, the escalating violence against Asians, Latinos, blacks, and gays, and the we-they appeals of self-appointed arbiters of who looks and acts like an American. But some of it is hidden in code words like behavior and political correctness. Small, helpless, welfare babies, struggling single-parent and two-parent families, many forced by unemployment to resort to welfare or forced by declining wages to resort to sending a second worker outside the home, have been too often scapegoated for America's $4.1 trillion national debt and all of our national ills. Black males, regardless of attainment, are at risk of becoming the social lepers of the 1990s, as some seek to deflect attention away from the spiritual hollowness at the core of American society, the moral and economic failure of American leadership in all sectors, the structural problems of our economy, the exploitation of public resources for private gain by the few at the expense of the many, the disintegration of our families, and the breakdown of the moral and community and democratic values that hold us together as a people. The poor are getting poorer and the rich are getting richer, pitting American against American as economic uncertainty and downturn increase our fears, our business failures, and our poverty rates. In 1990, the top 3% of Americans reported total earnings of $390 billion, far higher than the $252 billion total earnings of the entire bottom 41% of our workers. Between 1980 and 1989, the total salaries of persons earning over $1 million increased over 2,000%. while those earning $20,000 to $50,000 increased only 44%, according to two Philadelphia Inquirer reporters. For the first time in this century, they said, members of a generation entering adulthood will find it impossible to achieve a better lifestyle than their parents. Most will be unable even to match their parents' middle-class status. While the middle class lost ground, the already poor became poorer, more desperate, hungry, homeless, and hopeless. There are more poor children in America today, 14.3 million, than in any year since 1965, despite the net 88% growth in our gross national product during this period. And contrary to popular myth, the majority of our poor children are not black, they are not on welfare, they live in working families and outside inner cities in small town, rural, and suburban America. Poverty is a national problem with a face of many colors and ages. Between 1989 and 1992, nearly 1/4 of the 1.7 million children who fell into poverty lived in two-parent white families, many of whom thought they'd never be out of work, need food stamps, or face homelessness or hunger. New Hampshire reported the largest rate of growth in food stamp participation in the nation over the past 3 years. It's time for all of us to wake up and realize that the poor are not somebody else. They are, or may be, you and me, or our children and our grandchildren. It is also time for us to ask every one of our leaders at every level of government and in the private sector whether this is the best that America can do or the best that America can be. I think it's a great human and moral tragedy that thousands of children and adults are starving to death in poor, war-torn Somalia with a per capita income of less than $200 a year and an estimated GNP of 1.6 billion. And I'm glad that we in the world are finally beginning to do something in a humanitarian way. But I think it is a human and moral travesty that an estimated 5 million American children go hungry and 8 million lack health care in a nation with a per capita income of $19,700 and a GNP of 5.9 trillion. Why are there more poor women, poor children in rich America than there are citizens in famine-stricken Somalia? More poor children in Los Angeles and New York City than there are in the developing nation of Botswana. What are the true values of a democratic nation that lets infants and toddlers be the poorest group of citizens? How does one reconcile rampant national child neglect and preventable suffering with the biblical warning that from those to whom much is given, much is expected? America is afflicted by a poverty of riches unleavened by enough justice. Our extraordinarily high poverty rates are not some unavoidable attribute of modern urbanized societies or acts of God. They are the highly unusual choices, conscious value and political choices of our political leaders and of our citizens. Our children are 2 to 14 times more likely to be poor than the children of Australia, Canada, Sweden, Germany, the Netherlands, France, and the United Kingdom, although many of these competitor nations went through some of the same macroeconomic problems and recessions as we did. The slow, grinding violence of poverty takes an American child's life every 53 minutes. But the deadly, quick violence of guns takes an American child's life every 3 hours, and the lives of 25 children, the equivalent of a classroom full, every 2 days. Do we really believe that the top military power in the world, with a $1.1 trillion arsenal, with 800,000 federal, state, and local law enforcement officials, 1.7 million active duty military personnel, and a purported $8 billion war on drugs, is helpless to keep young children safe to and from and in school in our nation's capital and in our cities and rural areas throughout the country? Is our social and moral development so arrested that we cannot see, hear, feel, and respond to the killing and injuries of our children, or curb the gun and drug-driven violence blanketing America and our nation's capital? Are we too weak to stand up to the National Rifle Association even when the prey is not helpless animals but helpless children? According to the Center to Prevent Handgun Violence, every day 65 American men, women, and children are killed with handguns, which in 1990 were used to murder 13 people in Sweden, 91 in Switzerland, 87 in Japan, 68 in Canada, 22 in Great Britain, 10 in Australia, and 10,567 human beings in the United States. A new handgun is produced in America every 20 seconds. But even handguns can't kill or injure fast enough for the nearly 1 million private owners of semi-automatic weapons. If we must have a license to drive a car and have it inspected every year, why shouldn't we do the same for the handguns and semi-automatic weapons that take as many American lives each year as drunk drivers? Our inner-city war zones are just a microcosm, however, of the larger American worship of violence that has become a leading national pastime and primetime obsession. Guns now exceed television sets as American playthings. TV Guide reports a violent incident is shown on average every 6 minutes. In real life, a child is reported abused or neglected in every kind of family every 13 seconds, mostly at home. We must begin to confront the shameful, violent war against children in our town and in our country. Although the Cold War is over and the hot drug wars besiege our cities, we are still spending $813 million a day on the military, $25 billion more than during the average year of the Cold War. Meanwhile, we still have some of our political leaders claiming, and I'm sure we'll hear it again next year, as we put forth a child investment agenda, that we're too poor, and we'll hide behind the deficit as saying we cannot give every child in America a healthy start, a head start, and a fair start. And we need to ask them, as women and men leaders and people who care about the future of the country, whether these are the priorities of a nation that values human life and places people above profits. During the 4 years I lived in Mississippi in the 1960s, I never cranked up my car in the morning without leaving the driver's side door open. That way, we were taught in civil rights training that if a bomb was planted under the hood and exploded, there was a chance of being thrown out and of escaping death. This became second nature, as did the acceptance of the possibility of a bullet out of nowhere or of visiting a client in jail who had been beaten. But I was not paralyzed by the fear, and more importantly, the far, far braver frontline parents and civil rights workers in Mississippi and throughout the South in the 60s were not paralyzed by the fear of violence, because we had hope, even though that fear never completely left our belly or our psyche. We were working for a better America, for a better future for our children, and we were engaged with a community of people from all walks of American life in a struggle for the civil rights of every citizen. People cared enough about their children, about each other, and about our country to band together to fight unjust racial discrimination and segregation in America. And they succeeded and won what seemed then the impossible battle against legal segregation. When I think back on that time and think about what is happening to our young children in the District of Columbia and all over America, I can only imagine and guess at the fear and anxiety and the daily burden of stress and loneliness of huge numbers of young children who each day navigate a dangerous no-person's land, peopled by armed gangs, drug dealers, and nervous youthful gunslingers seeking to preempt death by first strike. While human beings can learn to accommodate some degree of threatened violence and fear, if there is purpose and hope of change, the chronic, unrelenting assault that we are subjecting our children to is unprecedented and profoundly immoral, and will all pay now and later, as our children throughout this nation are paying now too often with their childhoods, with their dreams, and with their lives. So while I've given these pessimistic facts, I'm optimistic because I think we must do something. And we can do something. I believe in our nation. I believe in the power of men and women like ourselves. And I am so pleased to have more women in Congress, because we women sure can't do a worse job than the men in power, but we come with a sense of understanding of the struggle of mothers and fathers. And so I am hopeful. So I want to end with 5 things that we can do. The first is all of us must join in a massive crusade now to leave no child behind. A new struggle, a new spirit of struggle must rise across our land to stop the killing and neglect of children. And every American parent and leader and citizen led by our new president and Congress must personally and collectively struggle to reclaim our nation's soul and give our children back their hope, their sense of security, their belief in America's fairness, and their ability to dream about and envisage and work toward a future that is attainable and real. What feels so different to me today than felt in the segregated prison of my childhood is this sense of hopelessness among young people. I mean, I saw a 16-year-old Latino youth say to a CNN reporter some months before the Los Angeles riot that I just hope I can grow up and go to prison and not be dead. And I wondered what the American dream had come to, when this is how young people in this town and throughout our country, thousands of them, feel. And what is different is that they don't have adults out there struggling with them. I mean, while segregation was terrible and the bad old days sure weren't good, what was different, and we had hope because we had adults who didn't say we could win, but they said they were going to be out there fighting to end what was causing our misery and causing the inequality. And what we need to give our children again is an example of adults struggling with them and speaking out for them. This new crusade needs to be about the future and not about the past. It must transcend the old conservative and liberal, Democrat and Republican, big government and private sector, personal responsibility, and public policy labels. Our nation must come together again to put the social and economic underpinnings beneath the millions of white and black and brown children and families left behind when the progress begun in the 1960s, eroded and died on the altars of Vietnam and economic recession in the 70s and the misguided priorities of the 80s. We must struggle together again to be more caring, to be more tolerant, and to replace I with we and them with us. For it is not just poor or black children who are at risk today. Many of our middle-class kids are struggling with drugs and alcohol and family breakdown, and I have been very struck about how many middle-class parents who cried when their children left home to go off to college are crying even harder. Their children are moving back home after college because they cannot find a job and cannot afford a house and a child. These are not things that are happening to other people's children. All of our children are at risk. Let's join a crusade. And in 1993, we have two goals we want to achieve. You know, we've got a long-term agenda, but, you know, there are two things we want to get accomplished in 1993. We want to give every eligible child a Head Start. Everybody says they're for Head Start. President Bush says he's for it. President-elect Clinton says he's for it. The Congress said they're for it. The business community said they're for it. 1993 is the year to just do it. And so we want to have you speak out. I'm so pleased to hear that Head Start is one of your priorities. For full funding for Head Start for every eligible child, but we want to make Head Start full day, full year. We want to take it down to infants and toddlers because that is a very, we have a wasteland of social policy for the 0 to 3-year-olds, and we want to make it a real family support center. So we are looking forward to working with you to see that every eligible child gets an enriched, high-quality Head Start and gets ready for school. And the second thing we want to do is to immunize all of our children. It is disgraceful that in the nation's capital, only 43% of our preschoolers are fully immunized against preventable diseases. We lag behind 70 nations, over 70 nations according to UNICEF, in immunizing our non-white children against preventable diseases. Now, what does it say about us? We know immunizations work. We should not have children dying of measles, as we have had in the last 2 years. And every dollar we invest saves $10 on the other end. I think America is capable of immunizing its children. And so we want to immunize every child in 1993, particularly with a focus on preschools. We want to give every child a Head Start, and we cannot afford not to do it. And I look forward to doing that with you. The second step is to struggle to live our moral and family values in our private and public lives and insist that our leaders do so. Jefferson correctly stated that religion is how we live and not what we say. So are values. Talk is cheap, and it won't cure the pervasive breakdown of moral, family, and community values in America, nor will judgmental finger-pointing at any group or family type. The breakdown of values in America is pervasive, and it is personal and public, individual, cultural, and corporate. Sometimes I think profanity has become a second language in our culture. It's rich and poor, it's black, brown, and white, it's urban, rural, and suburban, and it cuts across all parties and ideologies. If we're going to repair our rent, family, community, and national fabric and rebuild the common sense of responsibility for our children and for our nation's future, every citizen must enlist for battle. Third thing we must each do is to take responsibility for our own families, community, and our nation and stop blaming somebody else. I'm so tired of hearing leaders and citizens blame everybody else for America's family distress and racism and violence, gender discrimination, and child neglect. What can you do to help each of us? Get your hands dirty, as many of you already have, and pitch in to get the job done. Our problems can be solved, but not in an instant and not without sustained effort and sacrifice from every one of us, working from the bottom up in every neighborhood and every community in America. So each of us must try to do even more than we have done in the past and more than is asked, without having to be asked, and not be afraid of taking risks. I hope none of us will worry about being politically correct or popular. that we'll just try to do the right thing, because I cannot figure out what the conservative or liberal or risky thing is about being out there being outrageous about immunizing children. I would think that that is something that all of us could get upset about. We should just try to do the right thing for ourselves, for our children, and to do for other people what we would like to have them do for us if the shoe were on the other foot. The fourth step is to resist extremism and divisive appeals to racial, class, and gender tribalism by anybody of any color in any position. As racial strife and hate crimes invade our land again, strong counter voices and actions must answer those who scratch and tear open rather than heal our ever-tender racial wounds. Parents and all adults in responsible positions must realize their extraordinary influence in shaping children's attitudes and provide everyday positive examples. And all of us must try to resist telling or laughing at or tolerating racial, ethnic, religious, or gender jokes, or any practices intended to demean rather than enhance another human being. That's the way we will build a decent America. And finally, I hope that each of us, from whatever faith, will pray for our own and our nation's rediscovery of our best selves in this time of change. That we will struggle personally and collectively to help our children regain their moral traction in an immoral world, that we will reflect anew on why we are here on God's earth, on what it means to be an American and a citizen of the world, and on all we have been given and all we have to give to leave our and God's earth better than it is now because we are here. I hope that we will, from whatever faith or ideology or race or community or family type we hail, commit to love and respect and protect every child as God's promise in a wayward world. And so I want to end with a new prayer that we're having as a part of our annual Status of Children report that we're going to release on December 17th. And it's to the God of all children, to the children of Somalia and Sarajevo, South Africa, and South Carolina, God of the children of Albania and Alabama, Bosnia and Boston, of Krakow and Cairo, Chicago and Croatia. Help us to love and respect and protect them all. O God of black, brown, white, and albino children, and those all mixed together, of children who are rich and poor and in between, of children who speak Russian and English and Hmong and languages our ears cannot discern, help us to love and respect and protect them all. O God of the child prodigy and of the child prostitute, the child of rapture and of the child of rape, of run or thrown away children who struggle every day without parents or place or friend or future, help us to love and respect and protect them all. O God of children who can walk and talk and hear and see and sing and dance and jump and play, and of children who wish they could but can't, of children who are loved and unloved, wanted and unwanted, help us to love and respect and protect them all. O God of beggar, beaten, abused, neglected, AIDS, drug, and hunger ravaged children, of children who are emotionally and physically and mentally fragile, and of children who rebel and ridicule, torment, and taunt. Help us to love and respect and protect them all. And finally, God of children of destiny and of despair, of war and of peace, of disfigured, diseased, and dying children, of children without hope and of children with hope to spare and to share, help us to love and respect and protect them all, and to work as we've never worked before to see that no child is left behind. Thank you.
going to have a question and answer period for about 10 minutes. And if you, do you want to hear?
No, I'm fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll start off with the first question.
Okay.
Oh, excuse me. For those of you who are guests today, what you should do is, if you've got a question, write it down on the cards that are at your table, and then hold it up, and someone will come around to collect it and bring it up here. It was reported in the Post this morning that while there was a lot of partisan maneuvering going on with the new congressmen and women in town, yesterday, all 24 of the newly elected female representatives, that's 21 Democrats and 3 Republicans, put out a statement calling for placing Congress under existing laws against sexual harassment and for full funding of the Head Start preschool program and for passage of the Family and Medical Leave bill. And since Head Start and these other issues are big on our agenda, could you tell us specifically how you think that we at the Women's National Democratic Club can help to bring that agenda to pass?
Well, I was so pleased about the statement of the women members of Congress. Had breakfast with Pat Schroeder and a few of them yesterday morning, and they are really gung-ho. And when I saw, to my surprise, full funding for Head Start is the #1 priority, I said, that's fantastic. What I think we can do is to make it impossible politics not to give full funding for Head Start, and that means calls and letters. And I think that, you know, if we were to have each of you say you're going to send a letter to President-elect Clinton, you know, and to the leadership on both sides of the aisle, Republican and Democrat, for full funding for Head Start in 1993, that would make an enormous difference. What we have to have is a groundswell of support so that we get both the level of support that we need and the quality improvements that we need. And so I think it really is calls and letters, and at some point we're going to have lobby days, and I can inform your leaders when that is, and to have you come with us around this specific children's agenda. And we're trying to stick with these 2 things, which is immunization and Head Start. Obviously, there are a few things like family and medical leave, which already have been passed twice, and they ought to just kind of go on and get it out of the way and do it quickly. The other one that passed last year that we want to make sure is reenacted quickly is the Family Preservation Bill, which was a part of the Urban Aid Bill that was vetoed. You know, we talk about family values, and here's an attempt to put some money into making sure that families can stay together through preventive services rather than placing them in out-of-home care that is far more expensive. And because it's passed, we are saying let's just do these things like family and medical leave and the Family Preservation Bill. But I hope you will write and call Republican and Democratic leadership and make a big deal with Mrs. Norton, who's going to be for this. But we really need to have the men and women in power know that there are a lot of people out there who are expecting them to act decisively on children, and with Head Start as the cornerstone.
We've got a couple of other questions about a possible expansion of Head Start. Questioner says, wouldn't a secondary Head Start program at early adolescence be invaluable?
There are many things that one can do. I mean, we want to take Head Start down, and Ed Ziegel and other early childhood specialists say you need to take it up as well so that you can sustain the gains. But in this coming year, we think that the first step really is to see how we can make it full year, full day, how we can make it go to 100% rather than 1/3 of the eligible children, how we can take it down to infants and toddlers and really provide the kind of parent education and supports, and then we can build on that. But the first thing we need to do is to put into place in this country a strong early childhood foundation so that every child is ready for school. We have these national education goals, which the governors and the president acceded to. The cornerstone goal is school readiness. If we don't achieve the school readiness goal, we're not going to be able to achieve any of the others. And so I think that it is the rallying point. We will obviously be looking to see how we can do more for children as they go through schools. We need to make sure that children are not only ready to go to school, the schools have got to be ready for every child. And Chapter 1 of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act is going to be coming up for reauthorization in the next Congress. And that is a place where we should be looking to see how we can begin to make it more targeted on the children most in need and to make it more effective. But if we can get a Head Start down and get it for everybody, then we can figure out how we can extend it up. But I want to not do too much initially.
There's an African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. What is your vision about how communities and neighborhoods in our country can support and help raise children, especially when family structures have broken down?
Well, it does. That is a wonderful proverb, and it does take a community or a village or a city or a nation to raise a child. And we've had this false dichotomy between public policy and private sector and families. You know, we need a platform of support across all of these. I think it's, you know, when I was growing up, children were viewed as community property. And we had parents, but we had extended parents. And if I did something wrong, my mom and dad knew about it before I got home, and I was in double trouble. The church and religious congregations were a second home, and while we could not go into public places or sit down at a drugstore lunch counter and have a Coca-Cola, my daddy built a canteen and a playground behind our church. And one of the things that we're working with, and we have 3 full-time people now just working with religious congregations, to get these churches to open up their doors and to provide a positive alternative to the streets for so many of our kids. When you talk to kids and ask them why they did this or that, they will mostly respond, I didn't have nothing better to do. And I think that's a terrible indictment of our society. Our religious congregations, our civic clubs need to be looking to see how they can provide a variety of positive alternatives to the kind of negative forces that too many of our children see on the street. We need to find how we can spend some of that time that we may have in tutoring children and working with families and trying to see how we could place those border babies in some place. You know, if each religious congregation in America, if half of the religious congregation, in fact even fewer, decided they were going to find one foster family or one adoptive family, we wouldn't have children in foster care in America. So each of us is going to have to find a way to sort of provide a safe haven. Kent Amos and others with whom we are working are now trying to talk about how we can set up homework centers or safe houses in the District of Columbia and around. And that's something that's beginning to happen in places around the country where children who don't have parents at home or who have parents who are working, who don't live in safe neighborhoods, can find a house to go to after school, to do homework, to have a meal, to have some attentive adults. And I think that we need to try to talk about how we can have safe houses and safe harbors. In my rural county, we're trying to get all of our churches to have family life centers and to be homework centers after school until, again, their parents get home from work. And so we've all got to figure out how we can make the whole community responsive to children and to provide them with positive alternatives through our clubs and through our efforts. I also want to say we've got the most well-educated group of senior citizens we've ever had in our history. And children so desperately need caring, consistent adults in their lives. We run a program for seriously emotionally disturbed adolescents called City Lights. It's now spun off, and it's an independent program here in the District of Columbia. And these are children, young people that everybody had given up on. Well, we have an extraordinary attendance record, and we used to have a lot of trouble, and I realized that the place is peaceful mostly because in every classroom there is a grandparent. And those grandparents are almost more important to the kids than the regular teachers. Young people just need attention. They just need somebody to spend time with them, and they need to learn what it is to be an adult. And so I hope we can find ways to volunteer. And there's a wonderful guide to volunteering for children that a young man, Andy Carroll, did, who's going to graduate from Columbia this year. He's kind of one of my surrogate sons. But if you want to find a way in which you can help children, get a hold of that volunteer guide. We at CDF can point you to it, but there's no excuse for all of us not finding a way to be a part of that village that raises all of our kids.
What do you think are the prospects of doing something about guns on the streets, and what do you think should be done right away?
Well, we're spending a lot of time talking to people about this and talking to Sarah Brady about this and others who've been working on this issue for a number of years. I think one is there are 2 sets of problems. One is in addiction. We've got to find a way to deal more effectively with the production of guns and people who sell guns as well as with the proliferation of guns. And I think that we ought to be talking about real rigorous gun control legislation as well as looking at all the other aspects of things that affect those people who both sell and do it. Secondly, we're going to have to deal with the whole notion of violence as a thing that we worship in our culture. You know, I mean, it is astonishing when one looks at TV or listens at the violent signals in our country. And I'm very much in favor of proliferation of anti-violence curriculum, which is now beginning to get off the ground in a number of school systems. We really need to talk about why is it we are so obsessed with violence in America. And in Dade County and in New York City, and I hope now more in the District of Columbia, there are a number of curriculum that are beginning to have young people grapple with why we use violence as a way of resolving conflicts and of trying to see if we cannot do more in conflict resolution and in settling our problems short of this. And third, though, we're going to have to deal with the longer-term causes that contribute to violence, which is hopelessness, it is drugs, and we're going to have to figure out both the drug and addiction issues and how we can have better enforcement against the drugs that are coming in the country, but we're going to have to deal with the demand side. And the demand side really gets back to the spiritual hollowness, the lack of purpose, the lack of strong family, the lack of positive alternatives and the sense of a future, so that the long-term solutions, I am convinced, to violence or to teenage pregnancy or to drugs are strong families, strong communities, strong sense of service. I think if people are engaged in purposeful action, that they're less likely to be engaged in all these negative things if they think they're making a contribution. And so I'm hoping that what this change in the last election about is a shift toward service, toward helping each other. I'm so excited about how excited young people are. I mean, when I went down to Little Rock for the evening of the election, I have the privilege of standing with all the 21 and 22 and 23-year-olds who felt they had regained their country again, who felt empowered, and who are all so excited and eager to go out now and to do something. I hope that that same kind of excitement and hope can be extended to our younger people who are less privileged. Service is something that is not only something we do for somebody else, it's something that everybody should be doing as a way of contributing. And with a new sense of hope and with positive alternatives and with young people getting a signal from people at the top and throughout our communities, they care and are caring enough to begin to take time and pay attention and provide alternatives for them and to see that their neighborhoods are safe and their schools teach them, I think we'll begin to see a turnaround. So I think that hope is not only the best contraceptive for pregnancy, I think it's also the best preventive for violence, and that if we want our young people to relate in a thoughtful way, then I think we do that by having family lives and communities that value different things. And so gun control is important, but it's only one emergency measure. We've got to deal with the ways in which we prevent it overall and with the deeper values of our culture. But we've got to have a specific platform come March, and hope we can work with you on that.
A couple questions referring to the same sort of sensitive issue, and I think this is something that people in the Washington area might wonder about specifically. The questioner asks, practically speaking, it's sometimes a problem for white people to find leadership roles in black communities at the grassroots level. And the question is really, if, you know, as a racially sensitive question, if a white person would like to help in a poor black community, can you give any guidance for the best way to bring their resources and expertise in at that grassroots level?
Well, the first thing is, I mean, there are many, many programs that welcome volunteers of all kinds. And again, I think that, you know, City Lights is one that I mentioned, and we have white as well as black volunteers, and the staff is a mixed staff. And if you look at the volunteer book, you will find there are many opportunities. It is important, however, to give people a sense of empowerment. And the first thing whites need to do also is to work in white communities to sensitize them to the problems of racial problems in our community and to poverty in the community. You know, churches in our country and synagogues in our country are still the most segregated islands in America. And so one of the first things I've said, if I can just play on Booker T. Washington, everybody needs to put their buckets down where they are and to begin to work with how the institutions that they are a part of are responding to the extraordinary poverty and violence in our own city. If, you know, we had the kind of power in this room making itself felt at our city council and with our mayor and with our political leaders about the killing of children and the immunization of children, we could move the District of Columbia to place a higher priority on children. If we had you involved in the efforts on child welfare and pushing for the foster care, you know, you would have a very different response in our nation's capital, which unfortunately is at the bottom rather than at the top on many child indicators. But third, to say that, there are many groups that welcome people of all kind, and you just have to sort of, be patient and to pick and choose. The border babies who are rocked over at DC General or at Southeast Community Hospital, they don't care what color you are. There really are opportunities to serve. We have one of the most wonderful profiles of something of success in the Jubilee Project, or Jubilee Homes over on Columbia Road. Those are interracial groups. I mean, Jeanette Getchis and others who are working for the homeless and for health care for the homeless are absolute saints. And these are all interracial projects. And so I really would urge you to get in touch with Jubilee. They've got a variety of services, and most of them are religious-based, but they really are doing God's work. So Phyllis Wolf is the head of the district of our CDF DC office. And she can point you to many places where you can go and volunteer at the grassroots level or in service organizations that would welcome you regardless of color. But I also urge that while you do this kind of volunteer work, that you also work in the congregations and in the civic clubs where you are to see how you can bring about a change in attitude and response to the needs of kids.
Well, that's about all the time we have today, and we could go on and on. There's a lot of interest in what you have to say, and we really appreciate your coming and being with us today.
Tell Tim hello. I will.